I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 245. Everything looks messy in the middle. So welcome back to the show, my friends. I am knee-deep in thinking about colleges with my oldest daughter. And I have to tell you, for those of you who have been through this process already, go buy yourself a drink or a great cup of coffee or something. I have looked forward to this chapter for so long. And I loved the whole process of thinking about colleges, at least in my recollection, right? Of my adult recollection of my teenage experience. I loved the process. And now that I'm in it as a parent and I really see all the pieces and parts and decisions and, stress that comes with this particular chapter of life, it looks a little different from this side of the equation. So one of the things that you'll recall if you've already been through this process, or consider this a preview of coming attractions if you have not, is this thing called the Common App, in which many universities now use the same application ostensibly to simplify the process. And there is one piece of that is called the personal statement. It's essentially the essay that you write universally across all schools that use the Common App. And then some of them require incremental essays beyond that. So my oldest daughter has been thinking about that personal statement a little bit, and it turns out that the way she hoped this process was going to go is that one draft would sort of come out fully formed, and that would be what we turned in. And I'm exaggerating certainly a bit here to make the point, but it is clear that the amount of revising that might be necessary to really get to something that tells your story in, 500 or 600 words is more than one draft. And with writing, at least for me, it often gets worse before it gets better. My first draft sometimes is pretty good, and then my second or third draft might actually diverge pretty markedly and not be good at all. And then it kind of hones in and gets to a finished piece. I don't like writing, but I like having written, as the saying goes. And this was such a reminder for me, just a really timely reminder that everything is messy in the middle, and it can get really frustrating. You can get to the place where you sort of want to rip the whole thing up or delete the whole file and just say, forget it. It's too hard. I'm never going to get there. And yet, that piece of the process, that really messy, divergent middle, is really important to getting to an end result that we're proud of, to something that we care about. And it's not just writing. Lots of things in life require this step. I thought about a few of them I'm going to share here. You probably will be able to think of more as you listen to this. So for sure, writing, anything in the writing world starts with an empty page. There's a draft. There's some number of revisions depending on how important the thing is. Even a basic email sometimes needs a little bit of a cleanup before it gets sent. And, a few edits, and then it's finished. And that process in the middle, it can definitely get worse before it gets better, right? Second example I thought of is whenever I'm going to organize something like a closet, right? My closet or one of the kids' closets, the kitchen cabinets, the garage, the unfinished basement where all the storage is. It always starts kind of like, it was in some semblance of order. We were living this way. And then you think, I'm going to make it so much better, right? But in order to get to that place where it's so much better, what happens? We take everything out, right? All the boxes come out and the hangers come out and everything is kind of in a big pile, right? The proverbial drawers are open and the stuff is everywhere and you're trying to sort it and nothing can get closed up. That is a mess. That is a messy middle. And then, of course, if you stick with it, you end up in the place where you've probably whittled the collection down a bit. You've donated some things or thrown them away or move them to other locations, and you end up with this simplified, orderly, organized sort of end result. But that middle, where everything was in piles on the bed or the counter or the floor, is a mess. It's a messy middle. The process of conflict resolution can be like this. Just thinking about those, I talk a lot about courageous conversations with my clients. And those courageous conversations, when we work up our nerve to have one, sometimes the beginning is pretty civil, it's orderly, but then we get to like the airing of grievances. There's this sort of middle piece that can be hard. It can be emotional. It can be nonlinear. We can sort of bump into each other a number of times as we're trying to get our point of view understood. We can realize that we're not being understood and have to start over again with some different ways of explaining the situation before we finally get to resolution, right? So a conflict resolution through the art of a conversation can have this really messy middle part. And I think honestly, sometimes we just stop. Somebody gets angry and they walk away, or we get frustrated and we shut down. And if we stop in the middle of the mess, we never get to the other side. And finally, writing is maybe a subset of this, but creating anything at all has this pattern, the creation of something from nothing. So, when I started this podcast back in the day, right, almost 5 years ago, when I started the blog even longer ago than that, if you're launching a website, maybe you're starting an art project like a painting, maybe you're making a meal, creating anything sort of has a messy meal. I'll use cooking because I love to do it. It starts out beautifully. I'm getting out fresh produce and my cutting board and, herbs and whatever. And then there's a giant mess at some point in the middle of the process before everything gets, sort of put away and cleaned up and something lovely is simmering on the stove or, being served. There is this sort of messy middle part. And if you walked in the midst of that, you probably would not be looking forward to the meal in the way that you are if you're arriving as I'm about to serve it, right? And truly anything that we create can follow that pattern. And I think it's an important reminder because if so many things are messy in the middle, it's probably important that we grapple with our judgment of that. Because if we hurry through that, if we rush that part because it's so uncomfortable, we miss out on the very best final outcome, that might be available to us otherwise. In fact, as I started to think about this for today's episode, I think every phase of a venture sort of has its own unique challenge, even the beginning, and the ending, not just the middle. And I want to talk about those a little bit because I think you may figure out where are you most likely to get stuck. And then we can talk about what do you do to sustain, to get yourself through whichever part of a process is the trickiest for you. And I started in the middle, right? Which is nonlinear, kind of on purpose. The middle is a place where I think a lot of us try to hurry through. So let's look at each phase of a venture in order this time, in chronological order. So if you were starting any kind of a project, any kind of a venture, the beginning, that phase where you're getting out of the gates, right? You're facing the blank page, or you're facing the overwhelmingly overflowing closet or cabinet, or you have the long to-do list and you haven't started it, or anything that's at the beginning. What you're up against is potentially unclear direction, not really sure what my vision is for how I end this. You might be facing beginner status, like the notion of, I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before, or it's been a while. And certainly the fear of failure. Often fear is a really governing emotion at the beginning of anything that we're about to embark upon. So when I think about that stage of things, the question is kind of what stops us from starting, right? What gets in our way? What's the barrier to even getting started? And I like Stephen Pressfield's term for this the best. He calls it the resistance. He coined that term in a book called The War of Art. And I love that book. I love Stephen's take on this, but he essentially describes an energetic force that keeps us from getting off the ground, right? It's all the what ifs, all the reasons we tell ourselves that we can't. Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. And you might be listening and thinking, that's actually my hardest part. Once I get started, I'm okay. And, momentum kicks in. But boy, when I'm standing at the starting line, my fear is like a giant wall. And I don't know how to push through that fear. And you'll know this is your biggest issue if you have a lot of ideas that have never seen the light of day. You're talking about all the things you could do or might do, but you haven't actually gotten yourself to take a swing at them. That's a good clue that beginnings might be the hardest thing for you. And that's, again, the biggest barrier here is the resistance. It's something that I'm constantly coaching women through, figuring out what's the source of their resistance. How do we get you, out of the gates and in motion so that you can actually have the experience? That's a big one. And then you get to the middle, right? Then, okay, let's imagine you can get yourself started. Now you're in the middle of a project, some kind of a venture. And this is where you need to diverge, right? You need to go wide, kind of expand, explore options, let yourself sort of roll around in there for a while. But that's messy. This is the piece that I was talking about at the beginning of the episode is once you're in it, oh my gosh, this doesn't look anything like I thought it was going to, right? I thought I was building a website and I have this mess. And now I don't even know the structure I want to be in. I can't find a visual identity I'm happy with, or you're starting a business and you just have program ideas coming up left and right and product ideas, but you can't get your arms around a structure or an order. So the middle is often about order seeking, like trying to find your way through what could be a lot of input so that you can get to the other side and actually bring things to closure. So I think one of the biggest barriers here is that we interpret our discomfort. We sort of interpret the fact that we hate the mess as evidence that we're doing it wrong. We start looking at that mess and telling ourselves, I'm doing it wrong, instead of as evidence that we're doing it right. And then we impose time pressure, right? Sometimes it's real time pressure, like there's a deadline. Sometimes it's completely self-imposed time pressure. I should be done with this by now. I have spent enough time on this. This does not warrant any more of my attention. I have other things to do. But the reality is giving this middle enough time to really be expansive, for us to look at different options, maybe try something and go, not that, and then back it down, and try it again. Boy, do we increase our odds of getting to an end version that we really love. And, for some reason, I was thinking about hanging art when I was just saying these words a minute ago. If you've ever hung a piece of art in your house, you probably walked around with it a little bit, held it up to the wall and said, maybe not there, tried somewhere else and went, okay, this looks good, and then hung it. And maybe if you took that really far, it was like you even taped out on where it was going to go on the wall or hung it in a temporary way so you could sort of live with it for a minute before you decided if that's really where you were going to land. That period that's the magic that I'm talking about. It's, boy, I thought it was going to be fine there, but when I moved it to this other side of the room, it was amazing. Our willingness to keep shifting them until it feels just right is really the magic of this messy middle. And if we interpret our discomfort with the fact that it's not fully hung, it's not finished, we haven't been able to check that off our list. If we get so uncomfortable with that we think we're doing it wrong, I should be done by now, then we don't always get to the best place. And again, back to podcasts and blogs and websites and meals and painting and organizing projects and writing, all of them kind of follow this same pattern. We need that middle to be divergent, to really give ourselves room to kind of explore around until we find our way to the finished product that we're really proud of. And that brings me to, the third phase of any venture would be the ending, the conclusion, the launch, depending on what it is. This is where we're going to converge. We're going to refine things. We're ultimately going to bring it to conclusion. We're kind of wrap it up. Seth Godin says this is where we ship it, right? We have an idea, we build the idea, and then at some point you got to ship it. It has to go out into the world. And to do that, we have to know when to call it. We have to know when to say, I'm finished, I'm done, right? This is good enough. It's complete, it's ready. And there's a different barrier that shows up here, and that's perfectionism. So some of us, and maybe you listening, has your most difficult challenges with endings, with being willing to say, and it's finished. And I think sometimes we think of the artist's temperament here, sort of that, I'm still refining it. It could get a little bit better. And that certainly plays out in writing. It certainly plays out in the visual arts. It plays out in music, where we're sort of refining, perfecting. And the problem is we can end up never being done. We can have that great unfinished symphony, so to speak, that no one ever hears. And so learning how to say this is enough and finding tools to help you make peace with this is good enough for now, I'm finished, is kind of the third and final piece. So any one of those really can get in our way. We can have difficulty getting started because we're really facing the fear in the resistance. We can have difficulty staying in the middle long enough to get anything good, which means we can sort of abandon our mission midway through it and never get to the end. So if you're someone who has a lot of unfinished projects, this might be something that you're really wrestling with. Or we can struggle with endings, with knowing how to get things completed. And that's where perfectionism could be the thing that's getting in our way. Like we're dragging out the ending because we just keep saying it's not good enough, it's not good enough. Any one of them can get in the way, but failing to recognize this idea that it's always messy in the middle really can be our undoing, because it happens in every project. Everything good that we're going to take on has a middle. And so if we're constantly telling ourselves, I'm not doing this right because look at how messy it is, it's not linear, I'm not seeing similar marked progress every single day, then we run the risk of we stop starting things, right? Because we're avoiding that phase. And that can really keep us playing way too small and way too safe to have a life that excites us. So the next time that you are in the midst of something, you're looking at the proverbial emptied drawers open everywhere, or you're in the middle of a sticky conversation, or you're looking at a draft that just isn't coming together, I want you to challenge yourself to let it be messy. Really embrace the messy, right? Don't rush through that part. Let it sort of meander around, because it makes tying it up in a bow that much sweeter when the time comes. And that's a fun phase, right? Getting to that phase where you're like, and done. This thing is launched. I'm putting it out into the world. That conversation happened and I got through it. The essay got submitted, whatever it is. My daughter's college applications go in, this fall. That process of allowing the middle to be messy it's where all the magic happens. So that's your reminder for today, that it's always, always messy in the middle. And let that be fun. Let that be an opportunity to really have fun and not rush to the ending too quickly. That is what I have for you today, my friends. If you have a moment and you liked this episode, would you take a second and share it with someone that you care about? It is one of my very favorite things to hear stories from listeners who tell me, I learned about your show because my friend told me. or my colleague told me, or my boss told me, my sister told me. It is so gratifying to hear about episodes being shared with people and so that it crosses their path sort of right when they need it most. It's so easy to do that from any place that you stream your podcasts. And then if you have an extra 60 seconds and you're willing to leave a review for the show, those are the very best way that you can help support what we're doing here at Brilliant Balance and get this show into the feeds of more women who could benefit from what we're up to. I would appreciate either of those things. Thanks for listening today. Till next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.